Hello everyone, and welcome to today's session. I'm Marcus, and we are going to dive deep into security engineering, starting with a fundamental cornerstone of the enterprise, Active Directory. Understanding how identity is managed is the first step in building a resilient defense. Active Directory Domain Services, or ADDS, provides the centralized directory services that hold an organization together. At the heart of this system are the domain controllers. Think of DCs as the brain of the network. They manage identities and enforce security policies across the entire environment. Take a look at this architecture. Because AD is the source of truth for who can access what, it is the primary target for any internal attacker. If an adversary gains control here, they gain control over every user and computer joined to the domain. From my perspective as a security architect, we have to look at this through the lens of risk. Compromising a domain controller is the ultimate goal for lateral movement and privilege escalation. We aren't just managing users, we are defending the core trust of the organization. Throughout this session, we'll explore how to structure, harden, and monitor these systems. Let's begin our journey by looking at the logical structure of this hierarchy, starting with forests and domains. Building on that introduction, let's dive into the core architecture of Active Directory. To secure an environment, you must first understand the high-level containers that define its boundaries. The forest is the apex of the hierarchy. It represents the ultimate security and schema boundary. Inside the forest, we have domains. These are logical partitions used for administrative delegation and replication. Think of domains as rooms, and the forest as the entire building. As you can see in this visualization, domains can be grouped into trees when they share a contiguous namespace. These entities communicate through trust relationships, which facilitate cross-domain resource access, but they also create potential paths for lateral movement. Here is the critical security insight. From an attacker's perspective, the forest is the only true isolation boundary. While domains provide organizational structure, they do not offer complete security isolation from a compromised forest admin. We must keep this hard perimeter in mind as we design our defenses. Moving from the broad hard boundaries of the forest we just discussed, let's zoom into how we organize objects inside the domain. Understanding the difference between OUs and containers is the first step toward effective security engineering. Organizational units, or OUs, are the most critical building blocks for us. Why? Because they are the smallest unit to which we can apply group policy objects. If you want to enforce specific hardening settings on a set of workstations, those workstations need to live in an OU. Take a look at this comparison. While default containers like the users or computers folders are built in, they are extremely limited. You cannot link GPOs to them, and they don't support the same level of granular administrative delegation that OUs do. When we design an OU structure, we aren't just making it look organized. We are defining our administrative reach. You can design based on geography, matching your physical office locations, or by function, grouping by department like finance or engineering. From a security perspective, a functional design often makes it easier to apply role-based security baselines. Keep this in mind as we prepare to look at specific AD objects next. Building on what we just covered regarding OUs and containers, let's look at the actual building blocks that populate those structures. Active Directory objects. These are the entities that represent our physical and digital assets. First, we have user objects. Beyond individual human identities, this category includes service accounts used by applications. As security engineers, we view these as the primary boundary for authentication and the starting point for most access control lists. Next are computer objects. AD isn't just about people. It's about the trust relationships between machines. Whether it's a critical domain controller or a standard workstation, these objects allow the network to verify the integrity of the hardware trying to connect to resources. Then we have group objects. While distribution groups are for email, we focus heavily on security groups. These allow us to manage permissions efficiently at scale, though we must be careful with nesting to avoid unintentional permission sprawl. Finally, we have group scopes, which act as logical access boundaries. Understanding the difference between domain local, global, and universal scopes is key to ensuring that permissions don't bleed across domains in a way that creates security vulnerabilities. We'll verify these concepts with a terminology check in just a moment. In this diagram, we will explore the hierarchical structure of Active Directory and how it impacts your security posture. The forest is the ultimate security boundary. It defines the scope of trust for all objects within the organization. Below the forest is the domain. This is the primary administrative boundary where policies and security controls are enforced. Notice the separation of OUs. Placing administrators in a dedicated OU allows us to apply a tiered administration model. The domain admins group represents Tier 0 access. This is a high-value target. Any account nested here has full control over the domain. Attackers usually gain a foothold here among standard users. Security engineering focuses on preventing lateral movement from this level up to the admin OU. Now that we've visualized the hierarchy, let's shift our focus to how an adversary actually exploits these structures. As security engineers, we must understand the attack vectors that turn a small foothold into a full domain compromise. Attackers primarily use lateral movement to hop between workstations and servers, often leveraging password spraying or NTLM relay attacks. Their ultimate goal is privilege escalation, finding that one overprivileged account that grants them the keys to the kingdom, domain admin rights. To help you visualize this, I've prepared a demonstration showing how these paths are mapped out in a real environment. Let's watch how an attacker navigates from a standard user to full control.
The attack path is identified.
That demonstration highlights just how quickly structural weaknesses can be exploited if we aren't careful. Alex, based on what we've seen, which part of this attack chain do you think is the most critical for a security engineer to disrupt first?
If we're stretched thin, is it better to block lateral movement early or guard domain admin at all costs?
Think of it as a blast radius calculation. If you lose Tier 0 your domain admins, it is game over. Lateral movement is the how, but privilege escalation is the why. Which one is harder to recover from?
I agree with Marcus, but remember that lateral movement is how they find those Tier 0 credentials. If we can't stop the jump, shouldn't we focus on making Tier 0 unreachable from lower tiers?
Sarah is spot on. If you isolate your tiers, lateral movement hits a wall before it ever touches those keys to the kingdom.
That isolation sounds great, but doesn't the forest boundary often fail us? Even with tiered models, One trust relationship can bridge that gap.
Alex hits a nerve. Trust is the engineer's nightmare. Even with tiers, if a Tier 0 admin logs into a Tier 2 workstation, the wall vanishes. If the boundary is the forest, how do we enforce the no downward login rule without breaking the business?
That is where protected groups and restricted groups come in. We have to automate the enforcement so the human error of a downward login is physically blocked by the system.
Exactly. We use GPOs to snap those ties. It turns a manual policy into a hard system limit.
Automated GPOs are a win, but can we actually trust the forest as a hard security boundary anymore?
Alex is right to be skeptical. In modern AD, the forest is an administrative boundary, but not always a security one. With cross-forest trusts or Azure AD Connect, the perimeter is porous. If you had to pick, would you prioritize monitoring or blocking? To counter the lateral movement and attack vectors we just discussed on the previous page, we implement the Microsoft tiered administration model. This is the primary structural defense for any security engineer. At the very top, we have Tier 0. This includes your domain controllers and any identities that have direct control over the entire forest. If Tier 0 is compromised, the entire organization is lost, so this layer requires the tightest security controls possible. Notice how the model flows. Tier 1 is for your enterprise servers and business-critical applications, while Tier 2 covers the vast majority of end-user workstations and devices. By segmenting these, we limit the blast radius of a single compromised machine. The golden rule of this model is shown here. Admins must never log into lower-tier systems using higher privileged accounts. If a Tier 0 admin logs into a Tier 2 workstation to help out, their credentials can be scraped from memory by a simple piece of malware, giving the attacker total forest control. Now that we've seen how attackers can scrape credentials if we don't use the tiered model, let's look at the specific hardening and monitoring steps we take to build a defense-in-depth strategy. Our first line of defense is the Group Policy Object, or GPO. This allows us to enforce security baselines across the entire domain automatically. Instead of manually configuring every machine, we use GPOs to ensure that security settings, like disabling LLMNR or enforcing SMB signing, are applied consistently everywhere. Next, we have Just Enough Administration, or JEA. This is the practical implementation of least privilege. Rather than giving an admin full rights to a server, JEA uses PowerShell role-based access to limit them to only the specific commands required for their task. But hardening isn't enough. We must monitor. Pay close attention to these event IDs, 4,624 for logins and 4,768 for Kerberos TGT requests. If you see a surge in 4,768 events from a non-admin workstation, you might be looking at a golden ticket attack in progress. Finally, we can use deception. By creating Honey users' accounts with high privilege names but no real permissions, we can set a silent alarm. Since no legitimate user should ever try to log into a Honey account, any activity on it is a 100% certain indicator of an intruder. To wrap up our session today, let's pull everything together into a final checklist for security engineering excellence. We've covered a lot of ground, from the basic forest structure to advanced hardening. First and foremost, never forget that Active Directory holds the keys to the kingdom. It is the primary target for any sophisticated attacker. If AD is compromised, the entire enterprise is at risk, so it must be your most protected asset. Building directly on what we just covered regarding credential isolation, the tiered administration model is non-negotiable. By enforcing these boundaries, you effectively stop lateral movement and protect your highly privileged accounts from exposure in lower trust zones. We also discussed structural integrity. A clean OU design isn't just about being organized. It's about ensuring that your group policy objects and security controls are applied consistently without the ghost in the machine issues that come with messy legacy containers. Finally, remember that initial hardening is only the beginning. As security engineers, you must implement continuous monitoring. Systems drift and new vulnerabilities emerge. Your defense must be as dynamic as the threats you face. Thank you for your focus today. I'm confident you're ready to apply these principles in the field.